Hey everyone, I'm Huggy, and this time I'll be going through the process for making hair. Specifically hair cards. Of course, there are multiple ways of making hair for our characters, and it'll all depend on what style or mood you're going for. So this time I'll be going with hair cards, which to me is a great way to have some realistic looking hair without the need to use particles or anything that's like super heavy like that. And I also think it just fits my particular style really well, so yeah. Let's make some hair. So this is the concept I'll be using. It's been drawn by Anisha Art, so go give them a follow on Instagram, they're really good, and I just really hope I said the name right. At first, this concept has really caught my eye because I wanted to sculpt the body and kinda just challenge myself because of the way the body is sculpted and everything, until I also realized that this would be a great concept for hair as well, so here we are. First step would be to analyze our concept and realize what we'll be doing. What I like to do is to separate the hair in chunks, so in this case it'll be the base, the ponytail, the bangs, and the braid. After looking at the pieces I'll need, it is time to look for a reference. Even if it's based on someone's concept, I still really like looking at how things would look in real life, so I can understand better how things need to look and feel. So now I'm browsing Pinterest and looking for the pieces I need. Things like pictures of loose ponytails, middle parted bangs, and braids. Now that I got all the pictures I need, it is time to take a look at them and understand what's going on. I'll take those chunks I talked about earlier and I'll make even smaller clumps based on them to really understand what I'll need to do. So I'll use the bangs as an example. See how the main two strands part here in the middle? That'll be one of the landmarks for aiming to hit. So now I'll be separating the two middle clumps, and I'll use this other picture as a reference for the flyaways at the sides, making 4 main clumps for the bangs. Same thing with the ponytail. Even if gravity drags all of the hair down, we can still see those bigger clumps forming. That's what we want to achieve. We'll also look at the base and the braids, looking for the bigger shapes to model later. After gathering our reference, it's time to make the hair texture. Because this is a subject with enough content for a whole other video, I won't be diving specifically on how to make them. This is the texture I'm using. It's one I made using a program called Fibershop, which I highly recommend due to how easily you can make hair texture with it. But I can also make a video in the future just talking deeper about hair textures and how to make them in Blender. So if that's something that interests you, please let me know at the comment section. So the things you need for the hair textures are clumps for the thicker layer, which will be our base, a slightly thinner clump for filling spaces in, and then slowly going with thinner clumps to break up the shapes and make everything more believable. I also baked the eyebrows and eyelashes into this map, but today's video will only be about the hair, so won't be worrying about that this time. There's a link in the description where you can download this texture map for free on my Gumroad. Now that we have everything set up, it is time to start working on Blender. This is the model I sculpted, still not finished, but already enough to make our hair on. So the first thing I'll do when you're using cycles, you can see that, for example, the eyelashes here start having those like weird black spots in them, and that's pretty much because our bounces for transparency aren't high enough. So basically cycles is like projecting its light rays into the planes, but there are so many planes that there's a time that they just stop. So for working on hair cards and cycles, the first thing we'll do is to go into our render settings panel, and into light paths, we are gonna bump up transparent. I usually go with something like 32, and you can already see how the eyelashes are already looking proper. 32 might be a little too high, it's gonna depend on like how complex your model is, but that's usually the value that I set up. So the first thing we'll do now, back to Eevee, will be to actually create a plane. So let's add our plane here. We'll just turn around and so we could see it easier. I'll drag another window here to the side, and now I'm gonna set up the material for our hair, so let's go with plane, and I'll call this hair, and I'll make this panel as a shader editor. So now we're gonna plug in our textures. So here we have our color map. This will be our normal map, set as non-color of course. And now I'll add a normal map node. So plug that in, plug that in. And of course I haven't made an opacity map for this because transparency is already in the alpha for the color map, so I'll just take our alpha here and drag into alpha. So you see how in Eevee it all looks weird? So to fix that, going down to viewport display here, and in blend mode we're going to alpha hashed. In shadow mode, same thing, alpha hashed. So now the textures are transparent again. And now for the shader side of things, I'll just go the roughness down a little bit, around like between 0.3 to 0.4. Transmission going a little bit around 0.3. I'm not going too crazy right now. We are going to adjust it with subsurface later on as well, but this is something that I'm gonna have to look properly to see like how things are going, so this is gonna be the basics for now. Now I'll make this back into a 3D viewport, and I'll use this second window as almost like our preview thing. So let me focus. Now I'm gonna take this plane, I'll scale it down on X a little bit, so we have this like long plane. I'll go to our UV editing workspace, and now I'll adjust the UV for this, so I'll take that, I'll scale, because I want it to fit properly within this fixed strand here, so nice. That's what we want, and this is gonna be the base for everything we do. It's actually huge, but yeah. I'll place it around here. This is something I'll keep going back to and picking up, so I'll usually just click on it with face select and shift D to duplicate. And after that I'll go to edge select and I can rotate and manipulate it to actually shape our hair, so for example, I can take this, I'll rotate here, I'll add another loop here, I'll scale the tips down a little bit to make a clump, and this is basically the workflow that we'll be using throughout the whole thing. And then after we shape our strand, I take an edge loop, I'll put it here in the middle, and then I'll Alt S so we could expand it a little bit so we can make the shape like rounder. After that, I'll be going to the modifiers here, and I'll add a subdivision surface so things can look a little smoother. Of course, if you're making a model for games or something like that, it's best to have it off and just like sculpt the janky parts away. But since this is mostly for render, I like having subdivision on. So now that we know the methods, let's start actually modeling our hair. Okay, so now we're ready to get started. I'm going to keep this window here so I could preview things from different angles as I model. And of course for this one I'm gonna hide the T and N menus. I'm also gonna hide the overlays and keep the viewport as ZV for now. And now I'll also create a collection for the hair, so just click here and add a new collection, and then rename this to hair, just so we can have things organized. And this will be base. So let me duplicate this, Shift D. I'll hide that one, and this I'm going to name as hair underscore base, because, you know, I'll be modeling the base of our hair now. Let's go to edit mode. I usually like keeping it to edge select. So I'll select the whole plane, I'll Shift D, and now I'm gonna start blocking out our base. At first, what I'll be doing is to literally take those planes and fill the head with. So the way I usually do is to take the roots, place here at the forehead and the tip, and loosely at the place where the ponytail will start, and just like that I'll start shaping our hair. Still pretty simple for now. There's also one thing that I forgot, so at least for this specific layer, you see how the ends of the hair are ending here, and this is not something I want, so I'm gonna select everything, go to the UV editing panel, and scale things down a little bit. So if you look at our hair now, it doesn't like have an end, which for this particular layer is what we want. So the purpose for this first layer here is to be pretty flat, and so I'm not giving much volume to the hair or anything. So pretty basic stuff for now. And I know this process can sound a little tedious for now, but it is one of those that, like, the more you do, the more you practice it, the faster it gets. My tip is to just sit back and try to relax as you do, because it does take time, but it's not like as tedious or boring as it seems. So, you know, put on some music, some podcast you like, or something like that. Let's just zone out and do things. Which in my case, it's usually music. Just again, this layer is pretty much the most boring one, so I'm not really worried about like adding variation or making some like wavy patterns and make it twist and turn and things. Like, this one isn't really meant for that. Yeah, once again, always coming back and looking at my reference when I'm doing these shapes, so I can know that I'm actually doing the hair directions and things like that right. So this is why I really like using edge select for when I'm shaping hair cards, so I could take an edge and like scale and move it around easier. It's just, to me, it's my preferred way of making selections when I'm doing hair. So now I'm going back to edit mode, and I'll go here to our overlays, and it's time to check the normals to see if everything is facing the right way. So I'll toggle face orientation, I'll see if everything's blue. Yep, everything's blue. So for example, if any of your hairs show up as red, something like that, red means that this face is actually the back of your plane, and blue means it's the front. So you don't want any of your planes facing backwards. If you have any red planes, you can select it and flip it. So that's why we were flipping our normals before, after duplicating a hair, so we won't get any like back facing. And I'll select this plane here, and I'll press P so we could actually separate it. Now I'll select everything, and this will be our second layer for this hair. I'll go down in one thickness level here in RUVs. Okay, back to edit mode, and now we'll be doing the same thing here, but this time our hairs are gonna be a little more complex. So this is the time where we'll be adding a little more variation and things like that. Placing the roots of the hair and then the tip. Nothing fancy just yet. Even if this is still like not the finer layer, it is still good to actually start like making smaller details and things with it. So now another edge loop here. So now once again we're shaping our hair and loosely following the base that we made. And I'll also start adding a little bit of thickness variation here. And once again we'll be shaping our hairs here. Same thing as in the first step. And once again, you don't have to be perfect. It actually helps to not be 100% perfect, so you should keep in mind to try and follow the original shape, but not 100%. And it's also good to try and avoid any clipping with your hair planes. Of course, it is gonna happen a few times, but it is still good to avoid it, so it doesn't look too weird in the end. Over here at the tip, I'm not that worried about clipping because this part is gonna be covered with another hair layer anyways, but in general I'm still gonna try to keep the planes from clipping into each other too much. And this is also the reason why I like having the second viewport there at the side, so I could look at it from various different angles at the same time that I'm actually placing planes. It is super useful. So now we have our second layer for the base hair. So once again, I'll be taking this plane here and I'll separate it, so B. And now I'll be doing something a little different with this layer. So right now I'm going to Shift D to duplicate it. Okay, I'll go to edit mode, select everything, go again to our UV editing, and I'll select this part of the texture here. So you see we got like lots of clipping, of course, because some of the planes are just over the other, and 3D stuff just freaks out when there's a plane inside of the other. So I'm going back to edit mode. I'm going to scale it up a little bit just so it's not clipping into itself anymore. And now I'm going to sculpt mode. And of course I'll press Alt A so we could auto mask by topology, which is really important on this stage because right now I want to only select individual planes and not the whole thing. But of course if you want to shape the whole thing you can Alt A and deselect topology. I'll take this layer we just duplicated and I'll be pushing it a little bit away from our hair. Not too much or else it's just gonna look weird. For this I like using the snake hook instead of just the move brush, but of course this is more like a matter of taste. So now with the snake hook, what I'll be doing is to actually displace some of these planes over here so the hair can feel like a little bit more loose and fluffy. And being careful not to do it too much. We're aiming to have a balance here as this is not the super loose hair layer, but we can already use that one to have some variation and such. And now we'll be taking that layer we just made here and we'll duplicate it one more time. Go into edit mode and I'm going down even further here, maybe even to this one. This won't be the flyaways just yet, but this layer is also gonna be pretty important, so scale it up here. And now also go to vertex, smooth vertices, and I'll smooth it a little bit because I want those planes to be like smaller. And I'll take the roots that we kinda destroyed here, pulling it down here, again using the shrink tool. Now I'll be bumping the scale a little more, and now I'm going back to sculpt mode. Now disable topology, and now I'll be doing some more broad edits. And now we'll be taking those hairs here and just shaping them, so this is more to like break up the shapes even more. So you know, this layer is there pretty much just to cause disorder. And to make the hair feel more like loose and fluffy. Take those and twist them a little bit so it could feel even more looser. And you can already see how our hairs are starting to feel much more soft and like a little messy here and there, which is what we want. And after we shape our hairs here, I'll be going back to edit mode, and some of these edges that you see here, that they're more like facing outside, and it just makes everything look fake. So we'll be taking those edges here and we'll be scaling them down. And some of the middle ones you can also scale up to make them a little more like fluffy looking. Okay, so now going for the ponytail. Now take this view and turn it around a little bit so it goes a little more similar to the reference that I'm using. Now take this plane that we made, go to edit mode, and now turn it around 180 degrees on the z-axis, so RZ 180. Just so the normals are facing backwards now. If we are to check, you see they're facing this way now. I'll also go to our UV editing tab, and I'll stretch this so it goes all the way down, because this time we do need a bottom. And I won't be using the thickest one here, because I want some more variation, so I'll be starting out with this strand, the second thickest. So yeah, well, now I'll be starting to block out our hair the same way as we did on the base, but this time we'll be a little more worried about the ponytail shape. I'll take the root here, I'll place it there, of course on the root of our ponytail, and then I'll shape it around roughly here. So we'll be creating a bunch of edge loops here so we could properly shape it. And now we're also once again paying a lot of attention to the tips here, because for the part of the ponytail, these parts will be sticking out quite a lot. For the case of the ponytail, it is also pretty crucial to pay attention to the tips, because these are parts that will be sticking out quite a lot. So it's also good to keep paying attention to the way that the tips go when having it follow the overall direction and flow of the whole thing. And I'll start shaping this again, because since it's not 100% symmetrical, and I don't really want it to be 100% symmetrical because we're talking about a loose ponytail. Also shaping the ends here to make the hair feel a little more loose. And once again, the ponytail, it's not exactly like the base hair, so we can already start breaking the shapes a little bit here, because we're not gonna have this super thick like first layer like on the base. The bangs are also gonna be in something similar to that. Something to keep in mind for later on. Always nice to keep checking for the normals as well to make sure everything's still alright, because sometimes I might just forget. And now I'll be giving some volume to these planes we just created, so I'll be making an edge loop in the middle of all of them, and I'll use the shrink tool to make them a little thicker, while also shrinking the edges a little bit so things could fit better. Cool, so now I'll go into sculpt mode, and once again just shape it a little more so I can make it look rounder and a little more full. So now I'll go back to edit mode, I'll take this plane we made and I'll separate it, and I'll also take this layer we just made, now duplicate it, go into edit mode, and I'll use the shrink tool to just place it a little more outside, so something like this. Doesn't have to be much, just a little more. Now I'll go into our UV editing, I'll make it one step down, this, and I'll select all of the faces here, only on one column, so one column, and in our 3D viewport I'll set this to faces. So now I'll go into UV, show and hide faces, and I'll hide unselected. So basically I splitted all of our planes in half because I want to separate them. So now that we selected everything, I'll press Y. So now you see we have them all separated from each other, which is what we need for now. So once again, I'll select everything. I'll take those planes we made, I'll overlay them with the other ones. Now select everything, and now I'll scale them to fit hair strands here. Now that we have it all separated, I'll go into sculpt mode, which I'll use to add some disorder to our hair. Okay, so now that we shaped everything, it's time to go back to edit mode. And once again, we'll be splitting those planes in half and expanding them a little bit, while also shrinking down the edges. And cool, now that we shaped all of those, I'm going to once again duplicate that, go to edit mode, I'll select everything, go to our UV editing, and I'll bring that a couple of thickness levels down, maybe this. Yeah, I think I'll split this, so I'll select all of these here, press Y to split everything, and these edges I'll be putting into this hair thickness. Well, now once again, go to edit mode, I'll use the shrink tool to separate them a little bit. Doesn't have to be too much. And now once again, we'll go into sculpt mode and shape those to give some separation once again. And now I'll take away the topology because I want to make some more broader edits here into the overall shape and silhouette. So right now we're seeing a lot of the loose hairs that are starting to appear here, which is something that I really love looking at. Okay, so I'll leave the ponytail like this for now, And now it's time to move on to the bangs. So now moving on to the bangs, I'll go into this plane we made over here. This time I'll actually activate mirroring, so I'll go to our modifiers, and I'll go to generate and mirror. Since this is so similar between both sides, I much rather make it with symmetry first, to then break the shapes later than to actually just model everything by hand. Then I'll place our root, and then be creating edge loops and shaping as I go. And now just shaping our bangs. I feel like the bangs are the more relaxed part of the hair to make, because it's not as complex as the other ones. Yeah, after shaping those, I'll be taking this layer that we just made, this one right here. I'll duplicate it once again. I'm not gonna thicken those out. We don't really need it for that one, so I'm going to edit mode. And I'll go even thinner for those, somewhere around here, so we can make it very loose. And once again, this is not as complex as the other layers, so we don't need that much to make the bangs work. As you can see, it already looks quite nice, but you know, we can always make it look even nicer. So the way I like making braids is to go here, Shift A, and I'll go into Mesh and Plane. So we'll be putting up a plane here. I'll go into Edit mode, and I'll isolate our selection by pressing backslash on the number pad. And I'll be pressing 1 to get into front view, and I'll select everything and press M and merge at center, because we want only this single vertex here. So the thing we'll be doing now is to go here into our snapping options, and I'll be snapping into increment and also have it enabled here, so every time we extrude something, it is going to snap into the grid, which will be super important for us. So what I'll be doing, I'll extrude this, and I'll go up and right a single square on the grid, and I'll be going up and left, again just a single square, and I'll be making this sort of zigzag pattern here until it reaches here in the middle. Now I'm going into top view, and I'll make all of it as a spiral, so I'll take this top vertex and put it here at the top. And we want this from a top view to resemble a square. As you see here, it all loops into each other, so when we go back to front view and we select everything, press Shift D, and I'll be moving it up here. It all connects with each other, making it a nice spiral. As you see here, I'll select everything, now merge everything by distance. So as you see now, this has been joined together, and I'll duplicate this a couple more times. So go up, select everything by distance, select everything, move it up, everything, merge by distance, because I have merge by distance on my quick favorites. It's also something that I use a lot. So now that we got this nice spiral here, I'll select everything, I'll Shift D, and I'll move it down around 2 blocks, so we got everything nice and aligned like this. Now I'm going back to object mode, I'll select it, And I'll add a subdivision modifier, so things can look a little cleaner like this. I'll apply. After we apply our subdivision, I'm gonna turn this into a curve. So I'll right click it, convert to curve, and this is what we'll be doing to give these guide curves that we made into an actual thick mesh we can work with. So resolution, I'll bring it back to 1. And then here under geometry, we'll be going with bevel, round, and I'll bring the depth to like 1. The number itself doesn't really matter, you see it made it super thick, so now I'm going back to edit mode. Now press Alt S and bring the thickness down like this to around here. Yeah. The resolution, I'll bring it to 3. We don't really need too much because we'll be working on layers with this as well. Let me shade smooth here so things look a bit cleaner. Now I'm going back to edit mode. I'll Shift D to duplicate that, and I'll scale it to SX-1. And now that we flipped, which as we done before, this is gonna flip the direction of the hair here, which is what we want. So now I'll grab what we just done, so press G and move it on the X-axis. Just a little bit, not too much. And I'll be moving down. It looks kinda like this. So you know, now we got our nice and clean braid shape. And after we did all that, I'll select it, I'll right click and convert it back to mesh, because we want this to be like a usable mesh for us. Cool, now I can bring our model back. So now that we brought the model back, you can see this is huge, so I'm gonna take our braids model here and I'll scale it down until it's roughly the size we need. Yeah, something like this. Also make our strands here a little thinner because I'm gonna thicken them out a little bit later, so make them a little thinner, okay. And I'll select everything, I'll press Shift S because I want to snap everything back to the cursor. So go select cursor, keep offset, and I'll also move it up a little bit so it fits roughly here. This will be important for our next step, because now I'll be taking a curve and I'll be using that curve to displace our braids and put it in place. And the way I'll be doing that, I'm gonna add a curve, a path curve. You can also do it with Bezier, but I like working with path curves better. I'm going to edit mode and I'll put this curve in place to where I want our braids to be. And I'll be shaping it until it fits around. Also making it more of a curved shape here to make it flow a little bit, because I don't want our hair to be super stiff or anything. Okay, now that we got our curve, I'll go into our braids model again, and I'll add a modifier. This modifier would be here under deform, and it's called curve. And now in curve object, I'll go here in the eyedropper and select our curve. And as you see here, it's already starting to do things, but it's not the things that we really want. So I'll change the deform axis here to be on the Z axis. And now you see how our braids are actually following the curve, which is what we want here. So now that we did that, I'm going back to the edit mode with our curve, and now I'll be doing some fine tuning to put it in place better. And here in edit mode, we can also use the other curve controls like Ctrl T to twist and Alt S to actually scale, which will also be super handy for now. Want it to be like more falling over her shoulder in a way. Now I'm going back to our braids here. I'm going to our curve modifier and I'll apply it. And now I'll start cutting the size a little bit because I think this is a little too much, so I'll select the vertices here on the outside and I'll expand the selection by pressing Ctrl+. Like, yep, I think that's it. So now that we got our braids put in place here, going back to object mode, and I'll assign our hair material to it. And now you see that we'll be having to do some UV edits here. So back to edit mode, I'll select everything. I'll go to UV, and now it is time to put our UVs together. And with this, I'll also be separating a few of these into set clumps. So I'll go here into our face selection, and I'll select 2 columns at a time. So 2, press Y, so I have them separated. And 2 more, press Y to have them separated, and I'll keep doing that. Now that we have these clumps separated, we can select these clumps one by one. And again, I'm going back to UV, show and hide faces, and hide unselect. And now we'll be going into sculpt mode, and let's add a little bit of chaos to our braids here. They look okay, so now that we shaped our braids, going back to edit mode, so select it, and the same thing as we did to the other hairs, we'll be making the other layers now. So take this, I'll duplicate, now I'm going to edit mode, and the same thing as we did the other time, so use our shrink tool to separate it a little bit. Cool, now I'm going to UV editing, and I'll be going to a little thinner here. Now going back to sculpt mode. So now I'll be taking this model we just made here, I'll duplicate it once again and make one more layer out of that. Going to UV editing, and I'll go really thin on that one. And I'll be shaping it even more to make it more loose and messy in a way, which is something I really love doing in hair. Make it feel super fuzzy and cool. So now that we have the overall base of our hair here done, I'll be going through the extra parts that's gonna make it pop a little more. So starting out, we'll be making the sides of the hair, so we can have like a couple hairs falling down to the sides like this. So I'll be taking this plane here, and I'll also be activating mirror for that, and I'll be placing it roughly here, close to the ears. And once again, I'll be placing first the roots and the tips to then start shaping it further. And now I'll take this mirror here, and I'll apply it as we did the other time as well. Going into sculpt mode now, and we'll be shaping it a little further. Actually, no, I think I'll remove it altogether. So now I'll take this layer, and I'll Shift D. Once again, go into edit mode, I'll use our shrink to expand it. Same thing, go into UV, and I'll select one of our lighter clumps. Now use our sculpt tool again to shape things. And now we'll be going to add the tips of the braids here, so I'm gonna disable our mirror modifier here, and I'll use this plane to actually make the tips of our braid here. Let's bring it closer here so I can see things better. And now I'll add the loop here and just make it feel a little thicker here. And once again, I'll take this layer, I'll Shift D to duplicate, select everything, Alt S to separate it, same old thing. And I'll go into sculpt mode and do the same thing again. So now we'll be going into the ponytail and actually start making it more fuzzy and messy. And now we'll be shaping our hairs here. And I'll be shaping those planes up and to break the shape and the flow of our hairs here. So now that our hair is pretty much done, like this is already usable, but I'm still not 100% happy with this, so it is time to add some stray hairs and some smaller details here in the back, just things that'll make it feel a little more believable. But before that, I'll also take the ponytail here and I'll be shaping it a little more further. Okay, so already feels much better. So now we can move on and make our strays, which to me it's one of the more fun parts out of making hair. So I'll start by making some strays at our base layer. And I'll start like rotating and shaping things around and just making it feel so much more fluffy with those. And they don't necessarily need to follow the overall flow of the hair. So my base rule for this is to start following the flow, but then immediately going away from it. So now I'll be going back to the sculpt mode, and remember that the main purpose for these hairs that I'm making right now is to change and break up the silhouette a little bit, so we do want some of those like hairs flying outside of the head. Okay, so we have our strays for the base hair here. And now we can actually go and tweak the shaders a little bit more so everything looks good on cycles. So we'll go here to our render view here, so now I'm going into our shader editor. So you see the setup is still our same setup, pretty simple. So I'm going to the principal shader here, and the first thing that I'm going with is the transmission, which I'll bump it up a little bit. Now I'll also be adding a little bit of sheen, and I'll also add some subsurface. So for that I'll go in with Christensen Burley instead of Random Walk. Roughness, I'll dial it down a little bit more, something to around a 0.2. And I'm going back to specular, and I'll also be adding the brownish tone to our tint, and I'll add anisotropic with anisotropic rotation into 0.5 so we can get the more realistic hair shines. Now that we got our shader set up here, I'm going back to Eevee. And the last thing I'm gonna do here is to add the couple of flyaways here going down the neck. So now select our plane, I'll go into UV editing, and it is time to shape our hair. So make it pretty small here, almost like a square, not exactly a square shape, but something pretty close to it. So now I'll be putting these very loosely around here in the neck, as this will have more layers, so for now it doesn't need to be exactly perfect. I'll duplicate it, and once again I'll use our Alt-S, bump them up a little bit. And also another thing that I'll do now is to go here into our pivot point, and I'll set it as individual origins. So when I press the S button to scale, they actually scale along themselves instead of scaling along our gizmo here, which is also what I want. And that was our hair. I hope that you enjoyed the video. If that was helpful at all, I'd love to know. Please put in the comments if you have any ideas, anything you want to know from me. I'm always open to suggestions, and yeah, this is Huggy, signing out. Love you all. Thanks for watching.